Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon technically. I know you are all expecting to see Dr. Salaha Afridi. Unfortunately, she's had to pull out of the talk this morning because she has another urgent meeting to attend, so you are with me today. So I hope that's okay. So my name is Dr. Catherine Frogley. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I'm here to talk to you about raising children in the I generation. I can see that lots of people are still logging in, so I will just do a quick introduction and just check you can hear me, see me clearly, and then we'll get going into the talk. You will be sent a recording of the talk that you can look back at any time. So please feel free to relax, take in, absorb what I'm going to teach you today, and then you will have the content to look through at a later date. And we'll also send you a handout which has information from the slides on it too. So first of all, I just want to double check everyone can hear me and see me clearly. So you will see at the bottom that there is an option to raise your hand. If everyone can hear me, see me, please. I can see lots of people raising their hand. Excellent. That's always a good start, isn't it? The second thing I'm just going to draw your attention to is the Q&A button. So please note that during the presentation, I'm not able to see questions coming in, and often I hope that I answer some of the questions that you might have initially. So the best thing that I find works for me when I do talks or webinars like this is if you can just make a note of your question somewhere and just wait until the end, because if I do respond to the question naturally, then we just have a bit of time that we want to secure to make sure that we can get to questions that I haven't got to. So please hold your questions for the end and then pop it in that Q&A box, and I will get to them at the end. And hopefully we'll have a kind of 5-10 minutes to answer any questions. Okay, this is a big topic today, and I feel like I've got lots of things that I want to talk about, so I think I'm going to get straight into it so that I don't waste any further time. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Just give me a moment as I get this ready. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome to our talk about parenting in the I generation. So I just want to share just some very quick information about the LightHouse. I don't want to go into too much detail. You may or may not have come across us before, but we're a mental health and wellbeing centre in central Dubai. We offer a range of different services for wellbeing, mental health, in organisations, in schools, on an individual basis. We are a team of psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. We try to do as much as we can to incorporate all aspects of well-being into our services and into our work. These are some of the lovely people that we have working at the LightHouse. You can see that we're quite a varied bunch. We're from all over the place, and lots and lots of wonderful expertise within the team. And we, as I previously mentioned, we try to offer as much community support as we can. I've actually just compiled a report of the work that we've given the community, which is free of cost, and it's coming up to almost 1,000 hours within the education team. So we really do try to offer as much services as we can that are free, that are low cost to our community. Okay, so let's think a little bit about what we're aiming from today's talk. So first of all, the first thing that we want to kind of illustrate is why this is such an important topic, why parenting in the I generation is something that every parent should be thinking about and considering. And I think it's important to share that there is no right or wrong way. We're still new, we're still kind of developing the research, the understanding about some of these things. And I think each family and each parent and each individual has their own set of values that they need to consider when thinking about this topic and what is right for your family. So my aim today is not to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing. There are some guidelines that I share with you towards the end of today, but really my main aim for this talk is for you to walk away understanding the impact that technology has on our younger generation and on us, actually, so that you're informed and you're educated about the impact that this technology has. And for any of you who have not already watched The Social Dilemma, I'm going to encourage you also to watch that show on Netflix. I think most people are aware of this by now, but I think it also illustrates some of what we're talking about here today in terms of just how addictive and just how much technology draws all of us in. None of us are immune to this. So that will also be a little homework task for you after today if you've not already watched it. So really, you know, we cannot limit 100% technology from our children because it's in schools, it's what their friends are doing, it's part of their world. This is what they're growing up in. And so rather than, you know, being the parent who is, you know, not embracing it at all, we just want to be mindful. We want to be conscious technology users ourselves, but also for our children too. And we have to be the ones that supports them in their understanding of this, in setting boundaries around it. So I want to share with you some of the impact and effects that entertainment technology has on our children. Particularly, we're going to focus on these four main areas. So self-identity, the brain, relationships, and health. And I will talk a little bit more about these in detail as we go through today's talk. And then, of course, I'm sure all of you are here to understand, well, what can we do? Maybe some of you have some awareness already of the types of difficulties that technology poses for our children, but we want to know what we can do with it. And as I mentioned, it's not necessarily about me telling you what is right and what is wrong, but we do have some practical tips that you can take away with you to incorporate into how you guide and manage technology within your family. And we take some information about some of the guidelines that are available to us as well around this. And ultimately, as I mentioned, we want our children, we want everyone, in fact, to have a healthy relationship with technology and to be conscious of when and why they're using technology, because I think technology is not something that's going away anytime soon, if ever. And we, you know, we are part of this too. We are the ones who are also consuming and using technology. So we all want to be aware of this, and we have to guide our children into how they manage that. So this is our aim for today. So we have three main sections, and hopefully we will get some time at the end for questions. Okay, so first of all, I want to share with you some quotes that are taken from the people who are at the forefront of developing these technologies. So the first one here is, God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. And that comes from Sean Parker, who is the founding president of Facebook. The second one we have is from Steve Jobs. And actually, this is what he said, actually, we don't allow the iPad in the home. We think it's too dangerous for them, in effect. Now, this is somebody who developed the iPad. And then lastly, we have the vice president of the consumer part of Facebook, who said, I can control my decision, which is that I don't use that, I won't swear on a webinar. I can control my kids' decisions, which is that they're not allowed to use that. The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying, I can't actually see the bottom of that because my Zoom is in the way, how society works, I think is what it says there. So I use these quotes because I find it so interesting that the people at the forefront of developing these things are the ones who are also saying we don't allow our children to use it, or we have concerns about using this within the home. And these are the people that have developed it and know exactly what's gone into it. So it's good to hold that in mind. So for our first section, so parents versus the entertainment technology. So children are primed to engage in these different types of technology. It has been developed with them in mind, They are vulnerable for many reasons. They're vulnerable because of their age. They're vulnerable because of their stage of development. We're going to talk a little bit about teens and how this stage of their life is susceptible to technology, to social media, to the dopamine reward feedback loops that they're engaging with via video games, via likes, etc. So there are lots of vulnerabilities, and we know that there is a link between mental health and technology use that we need to be aware of and educated about. Now, when we're talking about entertainment technology, just to be clear, we're talking about video gaming, we're talking about social media, we're talking about research, and we're talking about pornography as well. And I know that that is a sensitive subject, but I think we have to be aware that this is out there, and this is something that potentially young people are engaging with. I was quite shocked in a session recently. A lovely young man who is 11 years old made reference to a pornography website, and that was quite shocking for me and quite eye-opening that someone of such a young age is aware of these things. And in the Middle East in particular, where there are, you know, there are lots more restrictions around that, it's quite frightening. So it's something we need to be mindful of and aware of, but I know it's a little bit of a sensitive subject. So first of all, when we look at these images, this is kind of showing us what the different types of technology is, what the different kind of impact it has. So we've got our smartphones, we've got our YouTubers, we've got our taking photos of our meals, we've got a young boy there playing on the iPad, perhaps engaging with something. So you can see all the different ways in which technology is part of children's worlds right now. And as I mentioned, the impact that that can have on them is related to their mental health, their identity, their relationships, their health, and we're going to go into a bit more detail about that. So first of all, when we think of our teens and our young people engaging in social media in particular, we have to be aware of who their role models are now and what kind of values are being portrayed to our younger generation through social media, through YouTube, through what they're absorbing online. So now you can see the selection that we have here, and I'm sure you can recognize some of them. A lot of them are these kind of super peers, if you like. They are young people who have created a celebrity kind of upbringing through YouTube, through Instagram, through TikTok now as well. So they are still young people themselves who are portraying or putting out there a certain amount of content that our younger generation are seeing. And so these are the role models that they have in their lives. And it makes it seem, you know, very easy to have a career like that themselves, but it also, you know, what are these kind of content, what are they showing our younger people? So the two main things that often we're seeing online is sex and consumerism. These are the two main values. And what messages are they sending? They're sending messages that we can influence people by being, you know, sexual, or we can never have enough. There is so many more things that we want in life through that consumerism message. So I think we have to be really careful about, or just acknowledging, what are these messages sending. I think particularly TikTok has got an awful lot of backlash recently, and I know so many young people are using TikTok at the moment, and there has been such a backlash because there seems to be a priority, or you know, the videos that show more flesh essentially are the ones that get sent out to more people. So for those of you who don't know how TikTok works, how it works is that videos are sent to you on a page. So it's not that you see content that comes from your friends only, or the people that you follow. You get random content from people that you don't follow, and there is an algorithm, and TikTok decides what it shows you. And what it's showing our young people tends to be, you know, scantily clad young ladies and women and men, those values of sex and those values of consumerism through TikTok. Now, that's not to say there isn't some good stuff on TikTok or Instagram, etc. That, you know, there are some very good uses of technology too, but we have to be aware that the majority of what our children are seeing are based on these two values. Okay, so let's think about some of the facts that we know about technology, and then we'll go on to think about how that might affect our children. So the fact is that our children are using a lot more technology than ever before. In fact, as you can see here, it's increasing year upon year upon year. And I think this year in particular, because of COVID, because of, you know, not being able to be with friends and family in the same way, that must have risen by such a huge amount. And we don't yet have the data around that, but I'm sure it's a lot higher. I have a number of young people that I work with who have real concerns about their use of gaming, and it's really hard to reduce that sometimes, because this is their way in which they connect with people. It's the way in which they feel good about themselves, because they haven't been able to go into school and get that kind of feedback that you get from school when you achieve, when you do well at something that builds competence, which is important in our teenage years. So the use of technology is so much higher for our young people, and it's growing. So this is a research study that found that in 2005, children spent on average 5.5 hours per day in non-school related technology, which is still so high in 2005. That increased to 7 hours per day by 2009. In 2011, on average, our children were receiving and sending 91 SMSs a week. In 2012, that doubled to almost 200 SMSs a week. In 2015, they were spending roughly 7.5 hours on technology that was non-academic, and roughly 10 hours a week on schoolwork. So our academics have now also moved into school, moved into technology as well. So it's even harder to create time away from it. In 2019, on average, 8 to 12-year-olds were spending 5 hours on technology, and teens, it was much higher, 7.5 hours of non-academic screen time. Now, this comes from the Common Sense website data from their research that they created. So we have to acknowledge that there is such heavy use. There is not enough. There is so much time that our children are spending online for school, for reasons that they have to, but also outside of school for entertainment, for connection, etc. The second fact that we know is that it hurts. We know through the research that excessive use of entertainment technology is harmful for children. We see that psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, physically, neurologically, and socially. So children who are spending the higher levels of time engaged in technology are going to suffer. So in terms of, let's expand on some of this. So in terms of their psychological well-being, we'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but we know that teens who engage in excessive use of entertainment technology are much more likely to experience depression. They're much more likely to experience anxiety, and they're much more likely to report loneliness. And we know that loneliness and depression are hugely correlated. I think most research studies have found loneliness as being a really painful feeling that lots of our teens are experiencing in general. And part of this has to be the amount of time that they're engaged online and not in real world connections. And when you look at the data from 2013, or 2003 maybe, when the iPhone was introduced, you see this dropping off of teens engaging, going out with each other, going on dates together, and an increase in their depression and anxiety symptoms as well. So emotionally, psychologically, it's having a huge impact. We also know that there have been some research that shows us intellectually that our children regress when they overuse technology. Now, some technology, of course, is part of life, but this is about excessive use of entertainment. So some of the skills that we would expect for them to develop, their speech and language skills that you get through communicating with people in real life, diminishes. Their kind of real world visual spatial skills, so kind of play-based activities that help children to develop their spatial skills, is also suffering. And so their language, their kind of physical skills, if you like, their emotional intelligence skills have declined if and when excessive use of technology. Physically, neurologically, there are changes in the brain. These technologies are creating dopamine feedback loops. This is why they're so addictive. That's why lots of us as adults are quite addicted to our phones, because we're getting a rush of dopamine, and dopamine is one of our happiness hormones. It's our reward pathway that says this feels good, do it more. And that is why it can be so addictive for us to engage with our phone, on social media, etc. And there is research that says likes on Instagram, views, numbers, comments, all these things can trigger dopamine in the brain. And particularly with video games, there is a huge amount of information that comes into the brain that is visually stimulating, it's colorful, it's very addictive, it kind of leaves you wanting more all the time. The best people in the industry have developed these games to be very engaging, and so young people are engaged and they find it incredibly hard to move away from that. It also sets those dopamine pathways really high, so then the rest of life feels a little bit less exciting because they haven't got that same amount of feedback that you get in a video game. And again, that creates more of an addiction, and it creates less satisfaction with the normal life. Socially, we're going to talk about this a bit more with relationships, so we'll come back to that. So let's think a little bit more. I've already talked a little bit about the impact, but let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. So self-identity is absolutely crucial, and particularly in this region where many of our children are third culture children, which means that they're growing up away from their home country, sometimes, often. That creates some disruption to their identity already. And normally we can manage that. We can support them through, helping them to connect to their identity at home, connecting to their identity in Dubai or in the UAE, wherever they may be, and taking those aspects and kind of negotiating all of those into their identity. But this is more disrupted for our third culture children than others, but for all children, identity is a crucial part of adolescence. It's the main task that adolescence has. And it's so important to have a sense of ourselves. It creates consistency, stability, it creates self-esteem. It's really important for children to develop a sense of, who am I? What values do I have? How am I unique? What is my contribution to the world? Why am I here? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my challenges? Why do I do certain things? These self-awareness, this self-reflection, all of these things are so crucial to our teenage population. And our technology use can disrupt that in big, big ways, because first of all, they are presenting, for the first time, they're presenting themselves online from such a young age. Facebook came into my world when I was 18 years old. So I'd already done some of my identity formation before Facebook came along. And then suddenly you're thrown into this world where you're presenting yourself online in the way that you see fit. And of course, it's filtered, it's edited. The more filters, the more editing that we come across, the more empty we feel, because we're showing us a side of ourselves that looks great, but we know that's not the real us. So the positive feedback that we get from this lasts only for a short amount of time, because then we realize that's not really us, because we've edited it so much that it's not us anymore. We're also playing into these values of consumerism, of sex that feels like I'm only worthy if I'm sexy, if I'm attractive. I'm only worthy if I have all this stuff that is being sold to me through the online channels that I'm viewing. So we see these disruptions to identity when people are using too much technology, and these comparisons to other people are much, much higher when you're using social media or technology in general. So before we used to compare ourselves to a classroom of people, now we're comparing ourselves to thousands and thousands and millions of people online, and we can spend as much time as we want looking at those people and, you know, comparing ourselves to those people, and not really getting that sense of self that you get through real life interactions and feedback with people. The brain is also affected. So I've kind of talked a little bit about this in the previous slide, but we know that research is changing, research shows us that technology is impacting the brain on a real world kind of scale. So our attention is being changed through the way that we absorb information online. So some research has shown that, looked at what it's like to read a book in real life versus what it's like to be on screen time. And what they found is that you're much more likely to take in more information and have better comprehension of the material you're reading when it's done in physical form as opposed to screen time. And part of that is because our attention is, firstly, we're having to manage all the information that's coming through the screen. So the light, the blue light, the information that's there, the opportunity to click onto different things and quickly jump from one thing to another is very tempting when you're using a screen. So our attention is taken away. We're not engaging with the information in the same way. And it's also mentally tiring for our brain. In the second section here, it says techno brain burnout, because we're processing so many lights, so much information all at once that our brains are not designed. They've never before had to process so much information at once. So accessing information is not necessarily, we're not thinking, we're not learning in the same way that we do with physical material. We can have this information overload that can be quite sensory. Processing is disrupted. It can interrupt what our learning is able to do. And we're often multitasking. We're often, as I said, our attention is moving from one thing to another, and that can affect our ability to learn, our ability to really engage with the information online. Our decision making can be disrupted also in younger children. Children are, particularly our teenage population, are already designed to be impulsive and more risk taking, and technology fuels that and reinforces that, because you can quickly send off a response, you can like something, you can respond quite impulsively to things online without necessarily having the natural time that it might take you to stop and pause and think about certain things before you respond. So it encourages young people to be impulsive, and they already are primed to be impulsive. It affects our relationships. So as I mentioned, in terms of self-identity, part of how we form our identity is through the connections that we have with people and the feedback that we get, the real feedback that we get with people. And we can feel quite empty when we're showing an inauthentic side of ourselves online and we're getting feedback from that. It feels good in the moment, but long term, it doesn't really show us or feel good to us because it's not our true selves. The other part of this is that you're spending less time, children now are spending less time with their peers, engaging in relationships. As I said, the number of children who report going on dates, report going round each other's houses, spending time together, has rapidly declined since the introduction of the iPhone. And so our relationships are not developing in the same way. And a lot of young people I work with report loneliness. And when you think about loneliness, it's not necessarily a lack of having people around you, but it's often how you're engaging. So how close do you feel that relationship is? do you have your guard up? Are you being authentic? Are you being vulnerable with that person? So they're really seeing the true you. And we're not doing that when we're having relationships online. We're protecting ourselves. We're much better able to keep our guard up. We're not vulnerable. We're not really engaging with the real life relationships that you would expect. And also when we're spending time online, we're taking time away from those real interface, that ability to practice managing conflict, for example. So having a disagreement with a friend, we're just doing that online now. We're not kind of sitting and working through our differences in the same way. We're not able to be able to express and show empathy because we're caught up in what's going on in our social world online as opposed to in real life. And we have seen a rise in narcissism and a decline in empathy, partly not just for technology, but partly because of that, because people are engaging less with people and because of these values that are seen online. Again, I'm going to come back to the P word, pornography. This, if our young people are accessing this and not real life relationships, then what is that message giving them? How is that showing them what it's like to be in a relationship? And that can be quite damaging for young people. And as I said, it's sometimes shocking to think of our younger boys and girls having access to this, but sometimes they do. And I hope they don't, but sometimes they do. So we just have to be aware of that. Family life may also have changed. So we're all engaging in technology in a different way. And so we also have to look at ourselves as parents, as the role models. We're on our phones, we're on our laptops, particularly during COVID, where we're all working from home and there perhaps are less boundaries around work and home life. So we have maybe less availability, we're less engaged with children because of that reason too, and we have less availability. But also, there is a shift happening with parents know less about the technology that their children are using. So Snapchat is a really good example where I have had to, and I still don't know, I don't have Snapchat, but this is the mainstay of our teenagers are communicating. And we don't know all the details about Snapchat. So they know more about this technology than we do often. And so that creates a kind of dynamic that we have to be aware of. We have less information and less authority on this subject now. And health, again, I've mentioned some of these things, but physically, children are much more likely to be more stationary. They're less likely to move. They may eat, in a different way. Their diets may be affected. They may be more likely to engage in risky behavior. Particularly, sleep is the biggest one that I worry about when it comes to gaming in particular, but even just phone use. I see so many teens, it shocks me because I know just how important sleep is for our mental and our physical well-being. And the kids in Dubai get up so early for school, don't they? They're often at school at 7, half 7 in the morning sometimes. And yet they're sleeping at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So we have a nation of children who are just so sleep deprived. And that concerns me because I know that teens need more sleep than we do as adults. So lack of sleep is a huge impact on health and mental health. And some of the mental health difficulties that we see is, encouraging violence, encouraging isolation, there's addiction, there's attention taken up with technology. I've talked about the rise in depression, anxiety, girls in particular, in terms of their body image and their sense of self and self-worth related to being attractive, being good enough is hugely affected. And there is some really interesting research that shows a huge drop in confidence for girls when they get to about 11, 12 years old. And part of that is due to technology, and part of that is other media that gets kind of thrown at them at that age. And we're often, we're so distracted and we're so unaware of ourselves when we're engorged in technology. And so we're not building that self-identity and that self-awareness. So again, I've talked about The Social Dilemma at the beginning. Please watch it on Netflix. I think it's a really important documentary about just how addictive these technologies are supposed to be and how they are designed to keep you engaged. And our younger generation, who do not have the same level of planning, of executive functioning, of the ability to think about the long-term consequences, they don't have the skills that we do as adults. And even we struggle. We are struggling to get off our phones. We are struggling to, how many of us sit there and find ourselves scrolling through technology sometimes, or have a pull to refresh the screen, or are kind of engaging in certain behaviors online, checking our emails, for example. So many of us are struggling with this as adults. So how do we expect our younger generation to deal with this without our help? I think this is a huge topic, but I also think so much of the political information that is shared with our young generation at the moment is also a bit of a concern of mine, because so many young teens have really strong views about certain issues in society, and some of that, they're not getting the ability to look at the fuller picture. They're getting a very kind of specific view on certain things, and that can also be quite damaging for them. So I know I've probably scared you all with all of this information, but I think it's important that we are aware of just how much this affects us and our young generation, and how they are an incredibly vulnerable age, and their brains are still under development until the age of 25. So we have to be that surrogate frontal lobe. We have to be the ones that support children to develop a positive relationship with technology, to be conscious about their use of technology, and to instill in them different sets of values that we want them to have, as opposed to what is being presented to them online, because we cannot control everything that they see online. So we have to be the ones as parents and in our families to support them with that. So how am I doing for time? Let me talk about what we can do, what we can be aware of. And as I mentioned, we will try and make sure that there is time for questions. So what can you do? So first of all, the best thing you can do is, from a very, very young age, as soon as possible, to instill in them values that are aligned in your family, and attitudes that you have. What is important to you? How do we measure our worthiness as human beings? What do we value in this family? And creating those habits and those values, being explicit with them, talking about them. What is it that we value in this family? What is important to us? Is it kindness? Is it engaging with nature? Is it being hardworking? What is it that we as a family feel is important? And as they grow into adults, they then choose, the values that they take forward with them. But giving them those very clear kind of instilled values from a very young age is going to be really important when we're then faced with technology later on in life. I think, ensuring that in addition to talking about values, we have to act in line with our values as a family. So there's no point in us saying we value kindness if we are not practicing kindness on a regular basis within the family, and we're, creating times where we are showing our children that we are kind and we value kindness, and we notice when they're being kind. So backing up what we say is important to us by acting in line with what is important to us, and creating time away from technology, and time where we're really consciously, purposely intending to act in line with our values, whether that be through, sitting together and creating a postcard that we send to granddad, or whether that's sending a gift to the neighbours, or whatever it may be. We're engaging our children in those values that we have, and encouraging them to do that too. We are the best role models for our children. So if they see us acting in this way, then they're much more likely to take that on board. We want to ensure that we are spending time with them, that we're giving them free time and play. We are allowing them the opportunity to develop the skills that develop through those real world interactions, those social skills. We're helping them to reflect upon what went well, what didn't go so well, helping them to develop that self-identity that they have. And being informed and engaged with the media and the online world. So what I mean by that is just trying to stay aware of what is out there and what children are using. So Snapchat's one that I've had to go and do my own kind of investigation. I've sat with many teens and said, show me, what does it look like? What do you do? How do you engage with it? Just so that we are aware of what they're using and how they're using it and why it's important to them. We have to embrace it. We have to understand that this is part of their life. This is something that is incredibly important to them. So we have to embrace it in some ways, but also protect them when they're using it. So in terms of self-identity, so I've spoken about some of these, so emphasize values, help them to identify their values, highlight their strengths and what you see they're passionate about. So if you've got a young person who seems to really enjoy reading, kind of making that explicit and saying, you know, I really see that you enjoy reading. That's a really lovely passion of yours, and I like to see you doing that. Giving them opportunities to reflect, you know, as I mentioned previously, how did that go? You know, if you've got a disagreement at school with a friend, how do you feel like you handled it? Did you handle it well? Or is there anything you could have done better? Or did you get what you wanted from it? Just helping them in those self-reflection questions to really build that self-identity. Help to ground them in reality through activities, by, you know, doing things as a family, spending time with them, thinking about who you want them to engage with in terms of your system, modeling to them how you engage with technology and how you engage in others is also going to be really important. I think a simple one that we think we might do, but do we really? And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves is when when our children are engaging with us, and I see this so often, you know, we perhaps don't immediately put our phone down and engage with them and talk and really listen to what they're saying. Sometimes we are absorbed in our phone or we're absorbed in an email, but really trying to make space to really show them that I'm listening and I'm putting away this device. Walk the walk, essentially, as it says here, showing them, you know, that you have time away from your device, that you engage in social relationships in person as opposed to just online, etc. And I think we have to be the ones that set limits, and that will be different depending on the age of the child. It'll be different depending on how capable they are. I know that for some teens, they really are very unable to pull themselves away from their phone. So I encourage their parents have to be the ones to set that limit for them until they show that they are ready to take their time away from it. In terms of the brain, I think the most important thing you can do is have a rest from information. I think it really is something that I've learned over time, is that we are in such a busy world in society, and we are always absorbing information, whether we're talking, whether we're listening to a voice note, whether we're texting someone, whether we're responding to emails. We're addicted to doing in this society, and we forget to do nothing. And I mean do nothing. I don't mean mindfulness. I don't mean relaxation or reading, because they're all doing things. When I say do nothing, I mean really have space in your day where you do nothing, and children need the same. And I mean just kind of letting your thoughts wander. The best time I do this is when I'm on the beach and I've got my book, but I've put it away, and I just kind of give myself a bit of time to just let my mind go wherever it needs to go. And we're often afraid to do that in this day and age, but that is how our brain rests. It's how it puts together all the information that we've been taking in throughout the day. It is how we come up with creative new ideas. So if we don't give our brain that time to do that, then we're not processing all the information that we have throughout the day. So trying to have downtime and give children downtime, avoiding and limiting entertainment, especially for younger children. When you can, blue light blocking glasses, so that blue light that really suppresses melatonin, which is part of our sleep hormone, then, you know, that's going to be really helpful. Making sure that they're focused on one task at a time. So you might need to take away the phone, the distractions. There's some lovely apps that you can put on your laptop that stops you from the urge to Google something. but just really giving children, teaching them to focus on one thing at a time. It's a myth that we can multitask. We can't. Actually, our brain is only able to focus on one thing at a time. So what's happening is we're just doing this back and forth game. So really trying to encourage them to do one thing at a time. And mindfulness is such a beautiful, simple training that you can do as a family. It doesn't have to be, hours of mindfulness practice. It can be 5 minutes a day where you sit down with your child and you encourage them to be mindful. And now we have access to so many practices online on YouTube that we can just put on, listen to it, and we can do that mindfulness exercise together in a family. And I think that's such a wonderful skill that you can teach your children. Relationships. So as I've mentioned before, we want to model healthy relationships. We want to ensure that they're having social experiences with people, enroll them into clubs, enroll them into, ask them what they're interested in at the weekend. If they're struggling to create their own social experiences, we can help guide and signpost them into different communities that they may engage with. Talk to them about what they're seeing online. Talk to them about relationships, and sit with them and look at TikTok with them and ask them, why do you like that? What do you think about this? Does it ever concern you, the things that you're seeing on TikTok? Well, how does it make you feel? Be really curious with them about what they're doing online as well. And nurture intimacy. Help them to understand that connection is not just about talking, but it's about how do you be vulnerable with people? How do you share yourself with people? And how do you learn how to trust certain people over others? Attune with them, be aware of what's going on with them, check in with them regularly, notice out loud what you see in them. If you see them looking down, say that, explain, it seems that things are a little bit difficult today. You don't seem yourself. Is everything okay? Attune with them, let them know that you see them, and open up that conversation. Really help them to engage in emotional intelligence, that ability to be aware of one's emotions, to be, processing and regulating those feelings is such an important skill for overall success. And just finally, we have some additional recommendations. These come from Common Sense. Some have come from Common Sense Media, some have come from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So just some kind of more specific guidelines for younger people. So if they're under 18 months, we want to avoid media use, except for maybe video chatting, especially right now during COVID, at all. We just want to limit it, avoid it as much as we can. Between 18 and 24 months, we want high quality, if we are using technology, and you may or may not want to at this age, but we want high quality. We want to be choosing what they're viewing, not just letting them press kind of the next video on YouTube. For preschoolers, we don't want no more than 1 hour per day of high quality programming. For 6 years plus, don't let media displace other important activities. So we want to ensure the basics are there. So we want to ensure that they have some level of exercise and movement. We want to ensure that they're sleeping. And if they're not able to manage that, and they may not be, then we have to set the limits around their phone use and technology in the evenings. We want to ensure that they're there for family meals, that they're eating properly, and that they have time for unplugged downtime. And that goes back to resting the brain, not necessarily, just doing other activities like yoga, meditation. Obviously those things are lovely, but we also want them to be able to have that real downtime. And that might mean that they come to you and they say that we're bored, we don't know what to do. And that is okay. Children should be bored. Children need to learn how to manage boredom. That's a very, very important skill. And it's part of what I'm talking about when we're talking about gaming, is that we're so primed to always have information. We're so primed to always be entertained. And actually, children need to learn to entertain themselves, and they need to learn how to manage boredom in a healthy way that doesn't mean immediately reaching for the phone. So make sure that these basics are there, and then add media on top of that, and co-view media with your kids. Help them to learn from what people are doing, seeing, saying online. Help them to be critical of their use of what they're seeing. As I mentioned, sit with them and ask them, and be curious, and try to leave your judgment at the door and just kind of sit with them and find out how they're viewing this content, what they're seeing, what messages they're receiving. So it's almost like you're a media mentor. You're supporting them with the media that they are observing. In terms of kind of limit setting, some of I think this again comes from a mixture of us and Common Sense Media. So try to remove the phone when they're studying. The phone is such a big pull. It has such an urge. I know when I'm doing something, I put my phone somewhere in the other room, and I feel this kind of band of energy kind of drawing me to go and check what I might have missed from the phone. But try and put it away and leave it away, and give them the opportunity to do that, focusing one thing at a time. Try and kind of instill times where they're not on their phone, or times where they have set times on their phone. So for example, it could be an hour after school, 30 minutes at 5 p.m, but have kind of limits around when they access their phone and their social media. Decide when all devices get turned off at night time, and be clear about that, communicate that, give them an opportunity to show you that you can trust them to do that independently if they're a teenager. And if they're unable to do that, then you may need to limit set that with them with empathy. Explain, look, I know it's really hard. I'm setting this boundary. You don't like it, but this is really important to me. Decide where devices will charge overnight. Will it be, and keeping it somewhere kind of public. So it could be your room, it could be the kitchen, it could be the family room, to prevent that pull for them to pick it up when they should be sleeping. Choose and diversify your media. So be aware, as I said, be aware of what media is out there, be aware of kind of what what children and young people are using. Common Sense Media is great because it can tell you, it gives lots of information about age-appropriate apps, games, programs that you can use to make the media that you're using more beneficial and better for your children, because there are lots of great things out there that can be really helpful, but there is also a lot that can be harmful. So use it in a way that promotes interaction, connection, creativity. Make sure it's diversified. It's not all of the same thing. It's not all social media, for example, but it's varied. Suggestions for when they're recreationally using screen time, watching it with them, watching it together, being curious about it, playing games together, engaging in video chat, watching kind of age appropriate or educational shows together, using it to play, to engage in kind of learning. I've had to adapt so much of my work with young people and teens this year because of COVID, and I'm obviously doing a lot of it online, which means I'm having to use games and programs and things sometimes online too, and I've used that to my advantage to to ensure that there's still connection there, but I'm using it in a way. So we're kind of playing games around emotional intelligence, for example. So just being aware and finding information about these things. Okay, some of the helpful websites, I've already mentioned Common Sense Media. Game Quitters is another one, Young Women's Health. These are some of the websites that you can have a look at if you want some more information about this topic. But for now, I think I'm gonna come off because I can see that I've got 5 minutes left and I want to make sure I get to some of the questions. I can see I've got 11 questions already, so let me see if I can get back to them. Okay, so someone has asked, will I be sharing the slides? Yes, I will be sharing. We have a handout and we also have the recording that will be coming to you afterwards. Someone else has asked, they've missed the first 15 minutes. So yeah, we will be sending a recording and the slides to you at the end. So please do have a look at those for any of you who joined us a little bit later. Yeah, so someone has asked a really nice question. I'm always concerned about talking at rather than to my child about this topic. What advice do you offer to approach this? I think that's a really nice question. And I think it's really great that you're thinking about how do we talk about this topic with our young generation. And I think that goes back to some of what I've said today around we have to embrace it a little bit. This is not going away. Our children are going to use social media. They are going to use technology. This is part of their social academic world. And we have to be mindful and aware of that. And we have to understand that this is really, really important to them. It is how they're engaging with their peers. It's how they connect to people. It's how they develop some sense of who they are through their online persona. It's how they engage in schoolwork. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to acknowledge that and show that whilst it was different for us growing up, we acknowledge that this is an important part of their life, and be curious with them. So rather than coming in with a sense of judgment or expertise, start by coming to them aligned. Be curious, be interested. What are you looking at? Can you show me? What is it about TikTok that you like? What is it about Snapchat that seems to entice you? What do you like about it? What is annoying about it? How do you use Snapchat? So just being really open and curious with them about what they like about these things is a really good starting place to talk about these things that they're using. And then when you've done that, you might then be able to shift into, are there any downsides, or I've read some information that it can cause some anxiety for young people. What do you think about that? Do you think it could create anxiety for people? And if so, how? And just gently giving them some information about it, but it's gentle and it's not kind of telling them what they should do. It's collaborative, and it's trying to get them to see you as a team member, as a mentor, as opposed to somebody who comes in and says, you're not using it right, because they know, they really feel just how important it is. So I hope that's helpful. Let me see if I can get in a few more before I have to go. So someone has asked, our daughter is 4 years old, uses the iPad for school and also plays games. Is there a recommendation about the amount of screen time for a 4 to 5 year old? So I think in the recommendations that I shared with you, which comes from the American Academy of Pediatricians, they recommend 1 hour a day, I think, for this age group, or preschoolers, I think, 1 hour a day, and it should not replace of non-academic work. So I appreciate maybe now, because some of the academic work is online, maybe that is going to be a little bit higher, but for games, for enjoyment, it shouldn't be more than 1 hour, and it shouldn't replace it should not replace their basic sleep, family meals, exercise and movement. So I hope that helps. I would also have a look at Common Sense Media. They have lots of information about this. Okay, let me do one more. So someone has asked, is children using mobiles, laptops, etc. for school homework, like researching, reading, etc. for quite long periods, considered as hurtful as things like gaming? So gaming, social media, entertainment technology. So that's gaming, social media, kind of over researching certain things. They are harmful because they, as I mentioned, they promote values that we may not want our children to be taking on as the most important values for them, which is sex, it's consumerism. So they're harmful in that regard. They're also harmful because the way that those games and entertainment apps are developed are keeping you engaged for as long as possible. And so it is designed to be addictive. It's designed to trigger dopamine in you to keep you engaged. And that is also harmful. It affects the brain. It affects their self-identity. We also talked about self-identity, and we also talked about how technology use can keep them away from sleep. It can keep them away from healthy eating habits, from exercise. So schoolwork can be harmful in those areas too, but less so, as long as it's being used in the way that it should be used for school research. I think there still is some some harm that can come from being on a screen all day long. It still affects their eyes, still affects their getting a lot of information. As I mentioned, reading, you're not comprehending as much when you're reading from a screen as opposed to reading from a book, because there's so much that's affecting your attention in that moment. You're more likely to click on other links, you're less likely to engage with the material. But I'm realistic in to say that there is so much that children are gaining from being able to access Google and, you know, being able to do research in that way. And if I'm, you know, we have to be realistic that they will engage with those things. They're less harmful than things like social media, video games, YouTube, etc. But they can still be harmful. So I think any technology use should be used mindfully and with limits, but particularly for the things like video gaming, social media, these kind of avenues that are designed to be entertaining are particularly harmful in their own right. But yes, all technology use has some side effects, essentially. I'm going to answer one more, but then I really have to go. So someone's asked about Kindles, and I think that's interesting. I actually don't know what the research says about Kindles. I use a Kindle myself, even though I am a little bit old-fashioned and I prefer a real-life book. I think there is something, there's not the blue light on the Kindle, so it is better for you than using a screen, because it doesn't have that blue light that stops melatonin, which is the darkness hormone, which triggers to our, it's part of what triggers to our mind and our body that we need to get ready to sleep. So the Kindle doesn't have that. It also doesn't have that temptation to kind of click on lots of things. So it's definitely better. I don't know the details of the research around that, but it's definitely better than using a regular screen. And they've also said Brain Rules for Children by John Medina is a great resource. And yeah, I think that is also a really lovely resource for anyone who wants to check it out. So I'm going to have to stop there for today. I feel like this is such a big topic and I would love to spend more time talking to you all. Unfortunately, I have to go to another meeting now. I hope this was helpful. I really hope you can take something from it. And I hope that, yeah, if there are any other questions that you have about this topic, you can send your questions in a direct message to Lighthouse Arabia on Instagram. You can also send it to Dr. Salaha Afridi on Instagram, and we will get back to you as soon as we can through those DMs. We are trying to be more responsive on that. So if I haven't answered your question today and you would like some more information, please do feel free to send us a direct message and we'll try our best to get back to you or an email. All right, have a lovely day and a lovely week. Take care.